To JTV. Having a look at Bantu, the Bantu people of Africa. Hope you enjoy. Like, share, and subscribe, and also comment. Agree or disagree. This is a place for you, JTV.
Group of people called the Bantu began a great migration from their homeland in West Africa. They traveled east and south, bringing with them their language, culture, and ironworking skills. As they settled in new land, they adapted to new environments and developed new technology. They cleared forests, farmed the land, and built thriving communities. Their iron tools and weapons helped them thrive in their new homes. The Bantu migration spread across Africa, leaving a lasting legacy of language, culture, and innovation. Today, their descendants can be found in many countries, proud of their heritage and the incredible journey of their ancestors. Kindly subscribe to my channel.
A lot of Luo people don't talk about this, but I will. Bantu people are not native to East Africa. They settled in East Africa and expanded around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Luo people migrated from Egypt and they settled in East Africa, conquering a lot of Bantu people and assimilating them into Luo culture. So now you have a lot of Bantu people claiming that they come from Egypt, but they are Bantu West Africans. Some of them are not even Luo genetically. So, Bantu people get conquered throughout history and claim other people's cultures, such as Arabs, Somalians, Luo peoples, white peoples through the transatlantic slave trade, which are now African Americans, and they claim other people's cultures.
Hope no one's been offended by that. It sounded a little bit, a little bit offensive. I'm not sure. I hope no one's upset about that. Apologies for that.
Bantu migration. Picture this. It's way back in the day, around the second millennium BCE, and the Bantu people are on the move from their homeland in West Africa. But this isn't just any old journey. It's a massive population shift that's going to change the face of Africa forever. So, these Bantu folks weren't just wandering around for fun. They were bringing some serious skills and tech with them. We're talking about things like farming magic. They knew how to grow crops like pros, thanks to their knowledge of high-yield plants and iron tools. And speaking of iron, they were basically blacksmithing wizards, crafting some top-notch tools and weapons that gave them a real edge. As the Bantu migration swept across the continent, they pretty much took over everywhere except South Africa and the Namibian desert. Can you believe it? And get this, they left behind a linguistic legacy too. Like, there are over 500 languages spoken today that can be traced back to the original Bantu tongue. Talk about leaving your mark. Now, the details of this epic journey are still up for debate among historians. When it all went down, why they decided to hit the road, and which paths they took, it's all still a bit of a mystery.
Book titled Origin of the Bantu by J.F. Van Oort. Now, most of the writing in this book is a theory proposed by this researcher into the Bantu language and their origins, but he gives clues that show us that the Bantu origins are Shemitic. What is Bantu? Whence did the Bantu race originate? It may seem very audacious on the part of the writer to try and give the answer to these two questions, which are of such immense importance not only to South Africa and to Africa generally, but also to the science of philology. Yet the writer's researches and studies during an unbroken period of 3 years have gradually convinced him of the general correctness of his answers, and for that reason he considers it his duty to place the results of his work before the scientific public as well as before general readers. The answers to the above questions may be conveniently gathered in the following. The Bantu language belongs to that group of language generally known as Ergo-Altaic. Now that's a term no longer used, right? It's an outdated term. But back then, that's what they classified the language as. The fact that in the Bantu language there are two distinct groups of words, one of which is far more archaic than the other. entitles us to come to the conclusion that there have been 2 Bantu invasions of Africa. And this once again ties into the current theory of 2 Bantu migrations, one around 1000 BC and the other around 1 AD. This is the Israelite exile from the Middle East. So he goes on to say the second Bantu invasion of Africa started from the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates and probably took place about the year 680 BC. So he ties this migration to the same time period of the Assyrian exile of the Hebrews into Africa. Now he points them to an area between Iraq and Kuwait, which is the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates. So he places the Bantu origin, or he theorizes that the Bantu origin is in the Middle East. So he's already proven that the Bantu come from the Middle East, or he has theorized that the Bantu come from the Middle East and not from Africa originally. Even though the Middle East is Northeast Africa, but semantics. It is also a fact, proved by the traditions of several Bantu tribes, that the region near Lake Victoria, which is in Kenya, in Zania, was the ancient and central home of the Bantu. But how did the first Bantu get there? This is a question which at present it is very difficult to answer, but after having taken all facts into consideration, I am inclined to think that the Bantu came to Africa by sea and not overland. Well, maybe some people took a boat. I doubt it. The Hottentot may have come to Africa as a Semang overland, and he was probably followed by Sakai tribes who became the ancestors of the Galas, the Somali, and other Hamitic tribes of North Africa. So remember that the Yabir, or Bantu Hebrew Israelite group, who live among the Somali Hamites. Okay, so you have the Somali Hebrew Jews, and then you have the Hamitic tribes who persecute the Bantu Jews up there today. But the earliest Bantu must have come much later. At all events, it certainly is remarkable that on the Egyptian monuments of early date we find no picture of a Bantu, nor do we find any description of Bantu tribes. In the second volume of his Herodotus, Rawling mentions an invasion into Africa of Asiatic Ethiopians about the year 1300 BC. So, this guy said he didn't find any monuments or statues of Bantus in Egypt, but he's not an archaeologist.
Curious about the fascinating history of the Bantu-speaking populations? Listen up. Over 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking populations embarked on an incredible journey, leaving West Central Africa behind. Exciting new research using genomic analysis of 2,000 samples reveals the migratory routes of these populations, putting an end to the age-old debate. Through encounters with local populations, the Bantus underwent genetic changes that allowed them to adapt and thrive in their new environments. But that's not all. The scientists also uncovered the genetic origins of African populations deported as slaves. The main ports of the slave trade to North America were the Bight of Benin and West Central Africa. Like and subscribe.
Slave trade or European colonization. However, long before the Europeans or Middle Easterners or Chinese had visited the continent of Africa, major changes were taking place. The people of sub-Saharan Africa are divided into a few major groups, but the largest of which would definitely be the Bantu peoples, a loose conglomeration of nations stretching from Cameroon to Mozambique. But this, of course, was not always the case. And the rise of the Bantu people is a fascinating but generally unknown subject to many Westerners. The Bantu languages today are a branch of the Niger-Congo language family, a truly massive grouping that also takes up most of West Africa, and I will admit that I've been guilty of incorrectly lumping them together in the past. However, the Bantu are definitely distinct for a number of reasons, and today we're going to discuss the expansion of the Bantu throughout Africa and the various empires and modern-day nations that have descended from this event. The general consensus is that the Proto-Bantu peoples originated somewhere near the border of the modern-day countries of Nigeria and Cameroon around 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, and either overpopulation in the region or a lack of fertile soil drove them southeast into the Congo Basin, that being the modern country of the Congo. This is comparable to how the Italic people spread across Western Europe and their descendants became the modern French, Spanish, and Italians, or how the Slavs spread across Eastern Europe, becoming the Russians, Serbs, and Poles. However, the Bantu people were not initially united under a single language like the Roman Empire, and hence their movement was a combination of conquest and assimilation, similar to how Southeast Asia was previously inhabited by a race of people very distinct from the Austronesian settlers that migrated from Taiwan. But who exactly were the native peoples of this region of Africa before the arrival of the Bantus? There were many diverse groups in Central, Southern, and East Africa when the Bantus arrived, and although the exact distribution of peoples is not entirely clear, Central Africa was mostly inhabited by Pygmy peoples, most of Southern and East Africa by the Khoisan, and the Nilotes inhabited parts of East Africa as well. The Pygmy people are noteworthy for their extremely small stature when compared to other Africans, with the various Pygmy groups still existing in the interior of the Congo, although they no longer retain their original language, instead speaking Bantu languages with a large amount of influence from the pre-Bantu Pygmy languages, and even to this day the average Pygmy is less than 4'10". The Khoisan have inhabited southern Africa for a mind-boggling amount of time, with some estimating that they've been in the Kalahari Desert for well over 100,000 years, and they are genetically and physically very distinct from Bantus and other Africans. The Khoisan still exist on the southern tip of Africa near the Cape of Good Hope, and some language isolates in East Africa have been classified as Khoisan, although their inclusion is dubious and requires further analysis. The Nilotic peoples possibly inhabited the majority of modern Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, although they're still in great abundance in South Sudan and parts of the previous three, and it's been suggested that their language is possibly related to Bantu and other Niger-Congo languages. They're notable for having nearly pitch-black skin, as well as being some of the tallest people in the world. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the average Nilote is over 6'1", giving a stark contrast to the neighboring Pygmy people of the Congo.
Yes.
Now, the Bantu expansion did not entirely eliminate these people from existence. As I've mentioned, they still do exist in pockets and regions in modern Bantu territory, and additionally, it was very common for the incoming Bantus to mix with these various groups during their march southeast, and hence many Bantu may have significant admixture from the previous peoples. For instance, in South Africa, the Xhosa people, I hope I'm saying that right, a Bantu group most closely related to the Zulu, have on average 30% Khoisan admixture, and many from Kenya and Uganda might also have Nilotic admixture, and additionally some might even have Cushitic admixture from the neighboring Horn of Africa. The Bantu established many empires and kingdoms along the way of their expanse, including the Congo Kingdom, the Empire of Great Zimbabwe, and possibly most famously the Zulu Kingdom, one of the last independent African kingdoms to be annexed by a European power. Currently 20 countries with the Bantu majority in Africa today, with around 300 to 600 individual Bantu ethnic groups and languages throughout these countries, and I'm going to name all of them for you right now in alphabetical order. No, I'm just kidding. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the more noteworthy groups in the continent. And since many of these countries don't have an ethnic or linguistic census, it is a little difficult to determine the exact distribution of people, with the area being one of the most linguistically diverse in the world. Because some languages may be mutually intelligible with each other, they may or may not be considered the same ethnic group. For instance, in Rwanda and Burundi in East Africa, the dominant language is Rwanda-Rundi, spoken by some 20 million people. However, the major groups in both countries are the Hutus and Tutsis, both of which speak a dialect of Rwanda-Rundi, yet are considered two very distinct peoples. Some of the groups with a more concrete identity are the Xhosa and Zulu of South Africa, who number around 8 and 12 million people respectively, along with 10 million Shona people in Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Also, keep in mind that because of the borders of the colonial era, many ethnic groups might be spread across multiple countries, while other groups that were previously at odds with each other might have been boxed into the same territory, leading to a bit of a conundrum for the modern people of these countries. The Swahili coast in East Africa has been greatly influenced by many different outside powers, being the only Bantu region where the dominant religion is Islam. Arab traders had been visiting the Swahili coast for well over 1,000 years, and even ancient Greek and Chinese cartographers were aware of its existence. After the death of Muhammad in the 7th century, many merchants and traders from Arabia, Oman, and the Hadramaut settled in this region, and the resulting trade language became known as Swahili, which is fundamentally a Bantu language, however is occasionally written in the Arabic script, especially in Zanzibar and the Comoros Islands, and has a significant number of loanwords from Arabic and to a lesser extent Persian. Swahili has since become the lingua franca of East Africa, and although the number of people that can be classified as ethnically Swahili is only a few million, the majority of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda have learned Swahili as a second language, numbering close to 80 million people, making it by far the most extensively spoken Bantu language. It would take around 2,000 years for the Bantu to finally reach the edges of the continent after their great trek through the jungles of the Congo, with many historians estimating that the Bantu people may have reached the southern coast of South Africa a mere 1,500 years ago, although the Cape was generally only inhabited by Khoisan peoples at the time of European contact. However, this was not the end for Bantu expansion, as there are many people with full or partial Bantu ancestry outside of this region of Africa. There is, of course, the huge African diaspora in the Americas, mostly in the United States, the Caribbean, and Brazil, although only around 20% of the Black American genome is of Bantu origin, and similar percentages for the Afro-Caribbean people in English-speaking countries, seeing how most of the slaves brought to North America were from West Africa, not Central Africa.
Discussing the Bantu. This subject has attracted interest from a lot of people, and there is so much information out there regarding the Bantu. So much of the information is written, much of it is not, and we're here to find out from our guest's perspective who the Bantu are. We're going to be discussing their migration and their relation to the tribes of Israel.
Abyssinia. So, for me, I feel I have that relationship with what people think of as the greatest king of Israel, Suleiman, because all the originals of Abyssinia originate from there. The topic we are going to discuss today, I'm not an expert or what, but I'm an interested party. People have been always talking about various groups, various languages. For example, here in Uganda, we have the Hamites, we have the Bantu, we have the Nilotics. Their background all claim to have come from either North West Africa or Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia nowadays. Now, just reflecting to my primary education, they used to tell us that the word Bantu came from those people who, when they are talking, they put the word into Muntu, Kintu, Akantu. They were not telling us the reflection, the background of that. And they said the Nilotics are those people whose language is very strong, like the Achoris, like the Rugubara, like those from Kenya. And again, the Hamites. These are the choice people who stuck to their way. They didn't intermarry, right? And they remain like the Hima, the Tusi, these people in the Karamojong. They said they are Hamites. Now, with that grouping, if we go back to more or less the era of Jesus, when they were talking, there was Aramaic type of language.
Aramaic.
Yes, which is in Ethiopia. Then there was the Roman language, there was the Jewish. All those came breaking. Now, if we want to diagnose systematically and seriously, we have to look at even time pre-history, the development of languages, what and what, the harm, the what. You see, these rights, the Arabs have come a serious subject in human development through religious matters, through civilization, through what. But if you look at them, they have a reflection to Egypt. The question, is Egypt the source of languages?
Well, I want us to start with the Bantu migration.
Yes.
Now, many historians say that the Bantu originated from West Africa, Cameroon, or others say that the Congo Basin. But others also say the origins are not very known. They are not sure of the origins. So, in your view, what's the origin of the Bantu?
The Bantu are thought to have originated from Cameroon, and we have clans in Usonga which claim that. West Africa has both the Nilotic and the Bantu. Now the question, are these people in West Africa, Nigeria, what and what, are they originators of Israel? We have to find out that. Because Israel is from a group of people that immigrated to Egypt. And Egypt had a very big reflection and effect to Africa.
So, when we talk about his country or a group of people,
Israel as a country that originated from a group of people. A country originates from a group of people.
okay,
It doesn't, a country is not formed there, then a group of people come. No, a group of people occupied there with their cultures, with their languages, with their administrative or management system, then it becomes a country. So, if we look behind, these people from Jacob immigrated to Egypt. They were there for so many years. They intermarried. They did what and what. And those people were interacting with, for example, Libya is one of the oldest countries in West Africa, affiliated to Egypt. So with this tendency, there is that in the Bible where they say they were building a pinnacle to go to heaven, then something happened. I think this was transformation. People started developing their own type of eclectics, what and language and systems of writing and what. Here, we have the northern people. They are Nilotics, but claim with the strength that they originate from Ham. For us, the Hamites, we claim we come from Suleiman. So we feel the Bantu group must have originated from the ancient people who are the Israelites of that time, who, when they went into exile, they migrated to various parts of the world.
okay, because
Details concerning the origin and descent of the Bantu peoples living in South Africa are obscured by the passage of centuries. But apparently the Bantu developed as an ethnic group somewhere in North, Northeast, or Central East Africa as a result of intermixing between the Negroid peoples of Africa and Hamite migrants from the East. Although these Bantu people are presumably of the same origin, and although the word Bantu, meaning people, is generally applied to all the tribes, each main group has developed its own unique language and culture. And now a man who has lived and worked with these people will take you on a personally conducted tour to the homelands of the Bantu. Mr. Mervyn John.
Centuries ago, the Bantu people started migrating from somewhere in North Africa southwards along the great inland lakes, and crossing the Limpopo River, they entered South Africa. The different groups spread over the whole of South Africa and settled in various parts of the country. To many of us, the Bantu peoples in South Africa may look alike, but in fact they consist of various distinctive groups who in their language and way of life differ greatly from one another. The first group we shall discuss is the Nguni, to which the Zulus in Natal belong. Zulu huts have a distinctive beehive shape. Long, pliant branches are planted into the ground, bent to the required shape, and then tied into place with grass ropes. The framework is then thatched or covered with grass mats. Handmade clay pots, grass mats, and baskets, as well as the grinding stone, are essential equipment for the Zulu housewife. This young girl takes great pride in the beaded ornaments which she has made. All household duties are performed by the women. The cattle kraal is the man's domain, and no women or girls are allowed to enter it. Every morning, the boys are instructed in their duties for the day, and in this way, a Zulu boy starts learning from his father at an early age. The Xhosa live in the Transkei and in parts of the Eastern Cape.
Southern Africa, an extraordinary group stands out. They're called the Lemba, or the Black Jews. They trace their origins back not to ancestors on this continent, but rather to people who lived in the land of Israel thousands of years ago. But what makes them even more remarkable is their assertion that when they came into Africa, they also brought with them possibly the most sought-after object in human history: the fabled Ark of the Covenant. The Ark that stood in the temple in Jerusalem and which vanished without a trace 2.5 millennia ago.
If you touch it, you die instantly.
Nobody but the priest was allowed to touch it. If they did, they were dead.
Perhaps they have the Ark of the Covenant. It belongs to us.
Over 50% of their Y chromosomes were much more closely related to Semitic people than they were to peoples of Africa, in particular the Bantu-speaking peoples amongst whom they lived. The genetic findings are highly compatible with their claims that some of their ancestors, we would now say male ancestors, have indeed come from the Middle East.
Within a few years, more sophisticated DNA analyses were done, and Tudor Parfitt and Magda Leroux collected the DNA of 136 male Lembas.
They were compared with a whole range of African samples and, of course, a whole range of Jewish samples from different parts of the world. It was a very major study.
Again, the DNA was analyzed, this time in London by geneticist Neil Bradman.
What we found specifically is that this Cohen modal haplotype, the type of chromosome that is found at high frequency, large numbers, in Jewish priests, was present in a particular clan of the Lemba, the Buba, where it's at a frequency of a similar amount, about 50%. So what we're saying is that the genetic data actually supports the oral history, not what one might have thought would be more likely, refutes the oral history.
So this is part one of the Bantu. I can imagine this is going to be a very a serious topic that, you know, people are going to have different thoughts. For myself, I'm not 100% sure where they're from, but I'll catch you for part two, and please comment, like, share and subscribe. This is JTV. Agree or disagree, this is a place for you.
So, the DNA analysis supported the idea that the Lemba were not only related to ancient Israelites, but that one of their clans is actually related to Israelite priests.
We did a new collection last year where Jewish populations throughout the world were scrutinized using the whole genome. And what it shows is that they form part of the same cluster of populations as the ancestors of the Jews. Its people came from the eastern end of the Mediterranean. These were the ancestors of the Lemba.
These results have shown that the oral traditions of the Lemba were remarkably accurate, even down to the number of Lemba men who came into southern Africa.
Trevor Jenkins maintains that it's possible, more or less, to say how many of the Lemba arrived in Africa. So, in other words, the founding group in Africa, according to him, is some 7 or 8 people. According to the oral tradition of the Lemba, there were 15 men in a boat. Half were lost or went to the north, and the other half came into Zimbabwe and then down into South Africa eventually. So even the figures of the number of people in the boat that arrived in Africa are confirmed by genetics.
The accuracy of the Lemba stories also changed the way scholars look at the durability of oral traditions.
While modern scholars in Europe, for instance, would reckon the Old Testament traditions that it couldn't last longer than about 100 years, oral traditions in Africa can last more than 1,000 years.
But the Lemba not only have remarkably accurate traditions about their origins, they have another tradition, an intriguing tradition, about being the custodians of one of the most sought-after objects in history, the mysterious lost Ark of the Covenant. Modern science has supported the claims of an age-old oral tradition of a peculiar group of people in southern Africa. They've claimed since time immemorial that they are descended from ancient Israel and that they journeyed first to a place called Sennaar in Yemen and then to southern Africa where they settled. Remarkably, a number of DNA studies confirmed these oral traditions to a significant degree. But the Lemba have another intriguing and ancient oral tradition, a tradition about their involvement with the legendary Ark of the Covenant. Joe Ralinga grew up with this tradition.
We traveled from Yemen into Africa, traveled from the north and came into southern Africa. And indeed, we carried the Ark, which was a holy drum, and I think it still remains holy now.
The Lemba refer to this object they identify with the Ark as the Ngoma Lungundu, the drum of God. When Tudor Parfitt lived with the Lemba in Zimbabwe, he also encountered stories about the Lemba and the Ark.
After my first journey through Africa, trying to determine the origins and the roots of the Lemba, I wrote my first book on them. And in it I mentioned the traditions of the Ngoma Lungundu, which comes from an Arabic source. And so in this particular case, a medieval traveller views a group of people travelling south, and they are carrying a mighty drum, and it is referred to by the name of Arahim. Now, Arahim could be Arabic, sounds like it might be Arabic for the All Merciful, one of the names of God. It could also be a